We're now weeks into the Liberal Party of Canada leadership race, and no one is more surprised than me to see that one of the candidates contesting to be the next party leader and prime minister is talking about the need to deport illegals. Who knew that I could agree so much with a Liberal? I'm also wondering whether the next Liberal leader will have a real shot at beating the Conservatives as they begin to pull a little lower and the Liberals a little higher. The political strategist is joining us today. And later on the show, we'll be joined by an economist who will talk about what the impact of tariffs could be on Canada. I'm Rachel Parker. Welcome back to The Rachel Parker Show. Hey everyone, I'm Rachel Parker. Welcome back to The Rachel Parker Show. We've got two great interviews lined up for you guys today. We are going to start by going to Hamish Marshall, a political strategist and a public opinion researcher at One Persuasion. We'll head to him now. So Hamish, I want to start by asking you right off the hop, how is the Canadian public feeling about getting this Liberal leadership race versus getting a Canadian federal election?
You know, there doesn't seem to be a lot of enthusiasm beyond Liberal partisans for this leadership race. I think there's a little bit of curiosity that we're going to get a new prime minister on March 9th-ish. We don't know when they'll actually be sworn in, but, they're going to get a new prime minister, some curiosity, but I wouldn't say it's enthusiasm. So I think a lot of people, who really just desperately want change, would be much happier to have an election. But, to be fair, there are some folks, not a huge chunk, but maybe 10% of the population who are saying, well, this is interesting. Let's keep an eye on this, and maybe we'll get some change with a new leader. But it's not overwhelming.
You're saying there's a lack of enthusiasm. From my perspective, it seems that Mark Carney is shaping up to be the front runner in this race. Is there enthusiasm surrounding him, or do you think that that's a bit inflated by the Liberal establishment and Canadians are just like, par for the course?
I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for Mark Carney amongst the Laurentian elite and the media establishment, especially in Ottawa, who all think he's this giant breath of fresh air. I think most Canadians still don't really have any clue who he is. And, from what they're seeing, he's not dramatically different from what, they've had for the last decade.
So if Canadians are not, really tuned in, paying attention to this, how does that shape up when, let's say, we get to the federal election? Let's say, hypothetically, Mark Carney wins and he has a lower profile among Canadians than, say, someone like Chrystia Freeland. Because the Liberals are so unpopular and Mark Carney isn't as recognized as being alongside Justin Trudeau during the last 9 years, does that give the Liberals a better shot of forming government than it would under someone like Chrystia Freeland, who has been, pictured and photographed with the Prime Minister for the last almost decade?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that even senior cabinet ministers, even ones who've been in the job for a long time, actually have shockingly low name recognition. The awareness of Chrystia Freeland is very high for people like you and I. It's probably quite high for people who watch this show, but your average Canadian has no real impression of her. That said, when someone becomes prime minister, their name recognition and the impressions of them shoots to like 99%, like within a week or two. So if Carney wins, and I think that's overwhelmingly likely, Carney's first week, 10 days, which could be all the time he gets before the election is called, is going to be vital to the impressions of him. And if he doesn't hit it out of the park every single day, it's going to be a real problem for him.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the Liberal leadership race in terms of the candidates. So obviously we've got Mark Carney, we've got Chrystia Freeland, we've got Karina Gold, we've got Ruby Dalla, and we did until recently have Liberal MP Chandra Arya, who was disqualified from the leadership race for essentially, he said, I don't speak French, and I don't think that Quebecers care that I don't speak French. Was a very bizarre thing to say in Canadian federal politics, where politicians often say, one an answer in French and then they repeated it again in English or vice versa. So it was a bizarre comment to make. And I kind of said, I wouldn't be surprised if they disqualify him for this. But there was a bit of a gap between when he said that and when he was disqualified. And what happened in that period is that conservatives and independents said, we are going to register for the Liberal leadership race because anyone can register. You don't even have to be a Canadian citizen. And it's just simple as going online and entering out a form. And everyone was kind of throwing their weight behind this Liberal MP. And then next thing we know, he was disqualified. To me, it kind of gave a show of weakness for the Liberal Party leadership race. Do you think that there was any, concerns from the party brass running this leadership race that many people were signing up to co-opt the race and to support Chandra Arya? Or do you think it was really such a small amount of people who would have been registering for him?
I think he was very popular on the internet. He was very much the internet's choice. There's no question. Typically, when that happens, it might be a few thousand signups. I have no doubt that 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 people might have signed up for him. I'd be very surprised if it was 10 times that. My view is I think the Liberal Party is in real trouble everywhere in the country. The polling is very clear on this. They're in trouble in Quebec, but they're in a little less trouble in Quebec than they are in the rest of the country. They've got a better chance at holding on to definitely not all of their seats in Quebec, but more of them proportionally. So I think fundamentally they were like, we just can't risk a guy running around getting the media every day talking about how he refuses to speak French for 6 weeks or whatever it is until the leadership that could further damage our chances in Quebec. Give the Bloc something to beat us over the head with, because that's just like catnip to the Bloc, right? So I don't think there was any real danger of him doing extremely well. But maybe there was a danger of him coming in third or fourth, and that would have again hurt their narrative. And so I think they just decided that if he was going to reject, bilingualism, which has been a core tenet of the Liberal Party for the last 50 something years, that wasn't something they were on board. They could get around.
You said that, you wouldn't be surprised if a few thousand people signed up to vote for him. How many people do you expect will vote in this Liberal leadership contest?
Look, I think this Liberal leadership contest, the way it's being set up, and there's another set of rules yet to come out, is extremely weak from a security perspective. I think there's going to be unbelievable. Every leadership race has allegations of funny business. But the fact of the matter is a leadership race where anybody could just sign up online, and we saw lots of people signing up their dogs and everything else, despite the fact the Liberal rules say they can fine people $10,000 if they sign up fraudulently. But how you would enforce that is there's no mechanism for enforcement. I think a lot whenever they publish the list or the number of people that have been registered, presumably in the next short period of time, it's going to be a big number because a lot of people are going to have been signed up without knowing that they've been signed up. Someone is going to have gone and signed up to all their friends and their family and their second cousins and all their employees at their store or whatever, and their cousins. Like, it's going to be a lot of people. How many of them will actually vote? How many of them will, get the process to get a ballot and be validated? We don't know what that process is yet, but I've got a lot of questions about the validity of the vote. So how many ballots will be cast and how many people will be vote is probably two different numbers.
You're saying, you have a lot of concerns about the validity of the vote. We know that there was the foreign interference report released yesterday, and the commissioner essentially said, there is no sign that there's traitors in Parliament, as we've sort of been believing for so long. But she did say we do need to do a better job of safeguarding our institutions. And she also pointed to the leadership races as one of those things that could use more rules. When you see, this second set of rules come out for the Liberal Party leadership race, do you expect that they are going to seek to add some safeguards?
I think they're going to claim there's a few, but I've been involved in a lot of leadership races over the years, and the ability for a party, even the professional side of one that's dependent on a lot of volunteers to actively enforce these things is quite limited, for it to be honest. And so I suspect there's going to be a lot of problems.
Well, you say it's quite limited, but I also have to wonder, it seems like it's probably too little too late. Like, people have already registered. Are they going to comb through those files now and remove tons of names from the list? I just don't know if I can see that happening.
Well, there's another stage. They've announced there's going to be another stage that these registered Liberals then have to register to vote for the leadership. but they have not announced what that registration process will look like. So I think the first list or the first number that's going to come out is going to be a ridiculously high number with everybody's cats and dogs and second cousins that they've signed up without them knowing on there. But they're going to sort of try to impose the security at the registration process, that in order to get a ballot, you have to, we saw it, we've seen it at various points, upload a copy of your ID, do something. But I think with the timelines they have and the capacity they have, that process is going to be weaker than it ought to be.
I want to talk to you a little bit about Ruby Dalla, one of the candidates, as I said, that is in the leadership contest. I don't think most people are aware of who she is. I certainly wasn't when I saw that she was running. And I saw a piece the other day, I want to say it was from the Toronto Sun, where she was called like the Canadian Donald Trump, which is probably not a very accurate comparison. We don't have politicians like Donald Trump in Canada. He's kind of one of a kind. Yeah. But we're seeing her saying things like, I'm going to deport all the illegals, which isn't rhetoric that we've heard in Canadian federal politics for a long time. And, now just recently, Pierre Poilievre actually spoke up and said that he would deport illegals and that he would even look at sending people who are committing crimes and here on work visas and permits, that he would consider sending them back. And I was saying to Candace Malcolm yesterday, I was like, I actually am really glad to see this rhetoric in federal politics, because I think it's normalizing the idea of deportations. And certainly I do believe that we should be deporting illegal aliens or those who are not Canadian citizens but committing crimes in this country. It's just so unexpected to see this rhetoric being used in a Liberal leadership race. She's been accepted as a candidate now. Do you think that her candidacy has the ability to pull some people who are in the middle or who are even more conservative, say, like, I'm not actually joining the Liberal Party as an effort to co-opt her as a joke, but because this is someone that I can actually throw my weight behind?
Yes and no. I mean, look, she's also now seems to become with Aria out of the race, she seems to become the internet's choice now. I also think that some of her comments are a little too late, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that the deadline for people to sign up was on the 27th. If she's trying to appeal to people who she would want, like, there's past the ability for people to register in the first stage of registration. So, I'm not quite sure if there's an audience amongst people who've signed up. If she was doing this with another month to sign up, maybe she could attract people with that message. But I agree with you. I mean, I think the idea that we should deport foreign criminals, which to me seems like a blindingly obvious idea, but apparently it's been very controversial. The fact that that is now being normalized, the fact that people are taking a tougher stance on this stuff, I think is very, very good. And the fact, to be honest, that the Liberals haven't yet kicked her out of the leadership race for saying that sort of thing that would be, heresy a couple of years ago, is also encouraging that, the center ground in this country is moving back towards common sense.
Just my last question for you here, because I know it's the one that my audience will be most vested in. But we talked a bit about Mark Carney. You said he seems to be the clear front runner. He wins this leadership contest, becomes the next Prime Minister of Canada. How much does this, race between the Liberals and the Conservatives balance out? Is it actually going to be a real election where both parties are going to have to give it everything that we've got? Or are we going to continue to see the Conservatives lead substantially in the polls?
So I think there's going to be should Carney become Prime Minister, there'll be a lot of curiosity about him as Canadians wake up one morning and go, hold on, who's this guy who's now our Prime Minister? And I think, he's a very presentable fellow. He will present well initially. And it will be up to the Conservatives to make the case, which I think they've already started making, that, he will be no different from Trudeau in anything that matters. And I think that will be effective, because I don't think he will be different than Trudeau in anything that matters. He's been musing about changing the carbon tax, but not in a meaningful way. He's given no specifics. He's missing the opportunity to differentiate him from Trudeau. And it's partly because he's got so much support, not just from MPs and organizers, but from Trudeau's own core people. Many of Trudeau's closest advisors and the Trudeau people inside the Liberal Party are for Carney. So I think he's going to be a very unconvincing agent of change, but I think there's going to be, at least in the first few days and maybe the first few weeks and months, there's going to be a great deal of interest in him, which might reflect in some slightly closer polls. Liberal Party seems to be trending up a couple of points in this leadership race. That's very normal once you get rid of an unpopular leader. So the fact that they're up a couple of points is not much of a surprise. But I think things will revert to more or less where we've been by the end of the election campaign.
Hamish, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, everyone. And again, that was Hamish Marshall, a political strategist and a public opinion researcher at One Persuasion. Next, we'll head to an interview with Jack Mintz, an economist at the University of Calgary. Full disclosure, I normally try to blend everything seamlessly together for you guys, but I did record this interview yesterday and it'll be fairly obvious because I immediately went and got my hair cut. So sorry for the whiplash on that front, but I'm sure you guys will enjoy this interview. We'll head to it now. Thanks for being here, Jack. So I want to start by asking you right off the hop, if you could just give us a snapshot. What is the impact of these 25% tariffs going to be on Canada?
Well, first of all, we don't know if it's going to be 25% or some other number and how it's going to be applied. But generally, it's going to be a mixed situation in the sense that either the impact will be not too large or the impact could be more significant, depending, especially if the tariffs are in for a long time. We don't know yet whether they could be just temporary until negotiations take place, and then they'll be ultimately removed or largely removed. Um, we have to remember that there are many things that we sell to the United States that the United States must have. For example, that would include things like energy. It would also include potash, lumber, and things like that, where we have a significant share of the U.S. market. And so, as a result, in those cases, when the Americans put on a tariff, that'll add to the cost of the goods that they buy from Canada. However, there will be some potential pushback because the U.S. is a very big customer for us. And so there's an economic story basically to say that if your demand is what's called price insensitive, in the sense that if you raise prices, it doesn't change demand very much, then most of the tariff will get shifted towards the United States. But if the U.S. has some substitutes or demand, let's say, drops, then that could cause Canadian producers to get lower prices on what they're selling to the United States. And so they'll have to absorb some of the tariff. And that's because the United States is a very big consumer in the world. And so we don't know exactly what the implications are. And it also will depend on what happens to the Canadian dollar. If it devalues, that actually softens the impact for Canadian producers, in the sense that they will be able to get more Canadian dollars for every good that they sell to the United States. And so even though the tariff may potentially reduce some of the prices they get, the devaluation of the Canadian dollar will offset that to some degree. And that exactly happened to China, by the way, when the Trump administration back in 2017 and 2018 put tariffs, quite significant tariffs, on Chinese goods. 2/3 of that was offset by a reduction in the Chinese currency.
So it sounds like you're saying, there's a lot of variable factors at play right now. There's still a lot that remains to be seen. So, is it not quite as simple as saying if these 25% tariffs go into effect on February 1st, then, X, Y, and Z goods in Canada the cost of those goods are going to increase. Do we know if the cost of goods in Canada, what goods are going to increase as of, early February if these tariffs come into effect?
Well, again, in the short run, they'll probably most of them, probably the tariff will be added to the price because there's contracts and things like that, which may not change. But the one thing that will happen is that the Canadian dollar will likely react right away, because the Canadian dollar, of course, is flexible, and I would expect that there'll be some devaluation in the Canadian dollar immediately, which means that our exporters won't be as harmed in the sense that people have been making out to be. On the other hand, import prices will go up, and of course, we'll have some higher inflation here in Canada as a result.
You've mentioned higher inflation. The Liberal government is now looking at essentially pandemic like relief packages for industries that will be accepted, that will be impacted by those tariffs. For me, who's looking at this, I feel like the Canadians are still paying the cost of the pandemic that relief we saw from a number of years ago. It seems like our currency has been significantly devalued. You're saying it could be further devalued by the tariffs. And now we're looking at more pandemic like relief, more money printing. Is this something that Canada can afford?
Well, first of all, I think we should quit panicking over tariffs. The tariff system, even at 25%, the tariffs will not be like the pandemic. That had a huge impact on the economy, as many people had to stop work right away. And so that's a totally different situation. In fact, I think politicians should take a little bit of a deep breath before they start reacting. If the tariffs are relatively temporary and we are able to work out, let's say, some negotiation with the United States, such as redoing NAFTA 2.2 or our treaty with the United States and Mexico, it could suspend maybe the tariffs for a while. It all depends. We don't even know if the Trump administration will put a broad-based tariff on all goods, or maybe they'll exempt certain ones, which could mean that the effective rate will be a lot less. For example, when the Chinese ones came in place, there was a number of exemptions given. So the effective tariff rate was a 17.5%. When Trump put in those tariffs back years ago, even though the actual rate was much higher, the official rate was much higher, and that's because not everything was subject to the tariff. So we'll have to see, what the United States does. There's big debate in administration right now in the U.S. There's some people who want to take let's say, a role in which the tariff rates would vary by good. Others are pushing for a uniform tariff rate that would apply on all goods coming from a country. And then again, there's a question of the strategy to be taken. There's some people saying it could be a low rate that the United States will start off with, and then say that we'll raise the rate if the situation, if let's say Canada retaliates and does things like that, then maybe they'll start at 10%, but then raise it to 25% if we start not showing we're not willing to negotiate or maybe even retaliate as well. We don't know what the Trump administration is going to do, and there's a huge debate right now in the administration about exactly how to apply tariffs.
You've said that there is a need really not to panic here. And on the one side of the negotiation front, we have the Trudeau Liberals who are threatening those retaliatory tariffs. And on the other side of the coin, we have Danielle Smith who said, let's work with the Americans and let's avoid the tariffs, altogether if possible. In terms of diplomacy, which approach do you think is better?
Well, I think Danielle Smith right now is right. I think we need to use diplomacy. If we do put on tariffs, it's going to be fruitless in many cases, because first of all, it's not entirely clear that we have that much monopoly power on the U.S. in terms of our demand for U.S. goods. Everyone talks about orange juice, as I wrote in my latest article. Even U.S. production of orange juice is actually a very small part of international production. It may be that at first Canadians are going to pay more for orange juice if we put a tariff on it, but then we might substitute away from U.S. orange juice by buying Brazilian orange juice, which is much more available in supply. So it all depends on how these things work out. And again, I think we have to remember my biggest concern is not over a short run situation where tariffs are applied. Tariffs have been around for a long time in history. It's not been the end of the world. It certainly is a cost and will have an impact on our economy, but not one in which I can see a huge recession developing as a result. My bigger concern is a long term, where tariffs can stay in for a very long period. And as the people around Trump, they've already indicated that they look at tariffs as a much better source of revenue, partly to drive more investment into the United States, especially into manufacturing, which they feel is critical for national security, not just for jobs, but also for revenue. And they would rather have a tariff than to raise income taxes, which they are planning to do, in the sense that the 2017 Tax Reform Act in the United States reduced personal income taxes and also had a number of corporate tax provisions that are being phased out now. And they don't want to allow those personal tax rates to go up. And so it'll cost money, it'll add to the deficit. And so they're going to need revenue to deal with that. And if that's the case, then I can see tariffs being in for quite a while, which I think will have a much bigger impact on the Canadian economy. And particularly what I'm worried about most is capital flying more to the United States, as we've seen in the past several years, where we have lost a lot of capital, and we're not attracting as much as we need to get for ourselves, as a result of many of the policies that we have.
Jack, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, everyone, that's all we have time for today. Before you guys sign off, I want to know what you think about this week's interviews. Please let me know in the comment section below what you liked, what you would like to see more of, so I can keep that in mind as I do planning for future weeks. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. God bless.